Marissa Cole stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Evan lift the broken washing machine with ease, something his father Richard had claimed was too heavy to move alone just last week. At 23, her stepson had transformed from the lanky teenager she'd met 5 years ago into a man whose presence filled every room he entered. "Got it, Marissa," Evan said, flashing that warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'll have the repair guy's number for you in a minute." She noticed how he always called her by her first name, never Mom, a boundary they'd both respected. But lately, those boundaries felt thinner, more permeable. Richard barely looked up from his laptop when she mentioned the washing machine that evening. "Can it wait until the weekend?" he muttered, his eyes never leaving the screen. 48 years old and increasingly absent, her husband had become a ghost in their own home, physically present but emotionally vacant. "Evan already handled it," she said quietly. Richard grunted. That was becoming his primary form of communication. Later that night, Marissa couldn't sleep. She wandered downstairs for water and found Evan in the living room, reading. He'd stayed in town after college, working remotely while figuring things out, or so he claimed. She suspected he stayed because he sensed the growing coldness between her and Richard. "Can't sleep?" Evan asked, setting down his book. "Just restless." She sat on the opposite end of the couch, pulling her robe tighter. They talked for an hour, about her frustrations at work, his thoughts on moving to the city, the way life never quite turns out as planned. Evan listened with an intensity Richard hadn't shown in years. He asked questions. He remembered details from previous conversations. When she finally stood to go back to bed, Evan touched her hand briefly. "You deserve better than how he treats you," he said softly. The words hung in the air between them, dangerous, true, and completely inappropriate coming from her husband's son. Marissa pulled her hand away gently. "Good night, Evan." But as she climbed the stairs, her heart pounded with something she refused to name. She'd just crossed a line she hadn't even known existed, by staying, by talking, by letting herself be seen by someone who actually looked. The late-night conversations became routine. Whenever Richard worked late, which was nearly every night now, Marissa found herself gravitating toward wherever Evan was, the kitchen, the living room, the back porch where he'd started having his evening coffee. "Richard's working late again?" Evan would ask, though they both knew it wasn't really a question. "Client dinner," Marissa would reply, not mentioning that Richard hadn't invited her in months. One Friday evening, Richard canceled their anniversary dinner with a text. Marissa sat at the restaurant alone for 20 minutes before Evan's message came through. "Where are you? I'll come get you." She should have gone home in a taxi. Instead, she sent him the address. Evan arrived in a button-down shirt and dark jeans, looking nothing like someone who'd been lounging at home. He'd dressed up, for her. "Want to still have dinner?" he asked carefully. "As friends, you shouldn't waste the reservation." She knew she should say no. She said yes. The restaurant was intimate, candlelit tables, soft music, couples celebrating love. They looked like a couple too, she realized with a jolt. A younger man with an older woman, both dressed for romance. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Evan said over wine, his eyes holding hers. Marissa felt the alcohol warming her blood, loosening her tongue. "I think I married Richard because I was tired of being alone, not because I loved him enough." Evan's hand moved across the table, covering hers. This time, she didn't pull away. "You're not alone now," he said quietly. The drive home was silent, charged with unspoken words. When they pulled into the driveway, Richard's car wasn't there, still at his client dinner. Inside, Marissa poured them both whiskey. They sat closer on the couch than before, their shoulders touching. Evan's cologne filled her senses, something woodsy and clean, completely different from Richard's expensive, generic scent. "This is wrong," she whispered, but she didn't move away. "Probably," Evan agreed, turning to face her. His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, fingers lingering against her cheek. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. In that moment, she'd already betrayed her husband, not with her body, but with her heart's complete surrender to someone else. Marissa began texting Evan throughout the day. Little things at first. The coffee shop got my order wrong again. Remember that book you mentioned? Just bought it. Hope your meeting goes well. His responses came quickly, always warm, always engaged. Meanwhile, Richard's texts remained transactional. Working late, don't wait up. Need my blue suit dry cleaned. Can you pick up my prescription? She started sharing more with Evan. Her disappointment when Richard forgot her birthday, her loneliness in a marriage that felt more like a business arrangement, her fear that she'd wasted her best years on a man who didn't see her. Evan's responses became more intimate. You're beautiful. He's a fool. You deserve someone who makes you feel alive. I think about you all the time. That last message should have stopped her. Instead, she replied, I think about you too. One afternoon, Evan came home early from work to find her crying in the kitchen. Richard had missed another important event, her mother's surgery recovery celebration. He'd promised to be there, then sent a text an hour beforehand. Something came up, you understand. Evan didn't ask questions. He simply pulled her into his arms, and Marissa let herself melt into his chest. He was taller than Richard, broader, solid in ways that went beyond the physical. His hand stroked her hair while she sobbed, and when she finally looked up, their faces were inches apart. Marissa, he breathed, and she could feel his heart pounding against her. She should have stepped back. Instead, she rose on her toes, bringing her lips close to his, so close she could feel his breath, taste the possibility of crossing the final line. The front door opened. Richard's voice called out, "Anyone home?" They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Marissa wiped her eyes quickly while Evan moved to the opposite side of the kitchen, his face flushed. Richard barely glanced at them as he grabbed a beer from the fridge. "Conference call in 5 minutes," he announced, before disappearing into his office. Evan's eyes met Marissa's across the kitchen, full of longing, frustration, and unspoken promises. That night, she texted him, "We can't do this. It's not fair to anyone." His response came an hour later. "I know, but I can't stop caring about you." Neither could she. Richard found the messages 3 weeks later. Marissa had been careless, or perhaps some part of her wanted to be caught. She'd left her phone on the bathroom counter while showering, and Richard, searching for his own misplaced device, had picked it up. The screen showed Evan's name. The preview was innocent enough. "Good morning. Hope you slept well." But Richard scrolled and scrolled. Months of messages, thousands of words exchanged between his wife and his son. Nothing explicitly sexual, but something far more damning. Intimacy, emotional nakedness, the kind of deep sharing that should have belonged to a marriage. "You make me feel seen. I wish things were different. When you smile at me, I forget to breathe. He doesn't deserve you. I think I'm falling." That last message was unsent, sitting in the draft folder, but Richard saw it. When Marissa emerged from the shower, Richard stood in the bedroom doorway, her phone in his hand. His face was white with rage. "How long?" he asked, voice deadly quiet. "Richard?" "How long?" he roared, throwing the phone onto the bed. "How long have you been fucking my son?" "I haven't." Marissa grabbed her robe, hands shaking. "We haven't. Nothing physical has happened, I swear." "Nothing physical?" Richard laughed bitterly. "You think that makes it better? You've given him everything that should be mine. Your thoughts, your feelings, your fucking heart." He wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. "You're never here," she said weakly. "You stopped caring years ago." "So you turned to my son?" Richard's voice cracked. "You emotionally cheated with Evan? Do you understand how fucked up that is? He's 23, Marissa, and you're supposed to be his stepmother." The word stepmother hung between them like an accusation.
Evan appeared in the hallway, drawn by the shouting. "Dad!" "Get out," Richard said coldly, not looking at his son. "Get out of my house. Both of you figure out whatever the hell this is, but not under my roof." Evan's face crumpled. "Dad, please." "I said get out." Marissa watched the two men she damaged stare at each other, father and son, both betrayed by the woman who should have protected their relationship. She had destroyed a family without ever removing her clothes.
Evan moved out that night. Marissa stayed, but the house felt like a mausoleum, full of dead things pretending to be alive. Richard barely spoke to her for days. When he finally did, his words were measured, cold, surgical. "I enabled this," he admitted one evening, standing in the kitchen where Evan had once held her. "I stopped being a husband. I see that now. But what you did, replacing me with my own son, that's something I can't unsee." "I know," Marissa whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Are you in love with him?" She could have lied. She owed him that much, perhaps, but she'd done enough damage with dishonesty. "I don't know. I think I fell in love with being seen, with being wanted. Evan gave me attention when you gave me nothing." Richard nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I understand that I used him. He's 23, Richard. I'm 38. I let a young man become emotionally dependent on me because it filled the void you left. That's not love. That's selfishness dressed up as connection." She'd spent the last week in therapy, confronting ugly truths. She'd crossed boundaries that should have been sacred. She'd treated Evan like an emotional husband while maintaining the pretense of being his stepmother. She'd let him develop feelings she knew could never be appropriately returned. The affair had been real, even without sex, perhaps more real because of it. "I'm filing for divorce," Richard said quietly. "Not because of Evan, because of us. We've been over for years. We just didn't have the courage to admit it." Marissa nodded, tears streaming down her face. "And Evan? He's my son. I'll forgive him eventually." Richard's voice hardened. "But you need to end whatever this is, cleanly. He needs to heal without you in his life." She'd already written the letter, apologizing, explaining, taking full responsibility for the inappropriate emotional relationship she'd cultivated, asking Evan to forgive himself, to find someone age-appropriate, to understand that what they'd shared was built on loneliness, not love. 3 months later, Marissa signed the divorce papers. She heard through mutual friends that Evan was seeing someone his own age, slowly rebuilding his life. She lived alone now, learning the difference between loneliness and solitude, understanding finally that betrayal isn't measured in touches, but in the sacred spaces we allow others to occupy when they shouldn't.